Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Summabid podcast. I'm your host, Kemper, and we've got a little bit of a different episode here today. Things are a little crazy, just like everything else in 2020.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We are doing things remote, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you're probably going to be looking at some sweet mountain shot instead of our lovely faces.
But, we apologize in advance.
So we're remote, and also joining us, in addition to Toby and me, joining us today is Brandon, all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota.
I'm back.
He's back.
He lives.
Barely. I'm just kidding. 2020 is trying to get rid of me, but it's not going to work.
All right. Today we are going to go over some of the biggest wins and losses, or the biggest news anyway, of the camera industry from 2020.
Well, before we get started with that, I have a question for you guys and for our listeners / watchers in the comments. So if you don't know what I do already, I'm a landscape outdoor photographer, right? And so I'm looking at my kit, and Canon just released the 7200 F4, which is the size of the 24-105. It's tiny, little itty bitty, under 2 pounds, 7200. So if the rumors are true that it's just as sharp as the 2.8, is it worth it for me to switch out my 2.8, which I love, for that F4 if it's so much smaller and lighter?
So I personally think it would be better for landscape photography, but you're going to limit yourself when it comes to any other photography work you might need to do. And the 70-200 2.8 for Canon is already tiny, like comparatively. So right. I don't know, like maybe it's worth it, but
yeah, I guess the thought of shaving off 1.5 pounds, well, I guess it's not quite 1.5 pounds. I guess it's closer to just a little over 1 pound. But what's your thoughts, Toby?
I hadn't really thought about it before. I think that it would be really great for landscape. And I know you mostly are using that lens for landscape at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I just don't use that lens for much else other than landscape, so.
Yeah. So I guess since you have the 100 to 500, do you feel like maybe it makes that lens a little more redundant if it doesn't have f2.8 in it?
No, because it would be so small, it would be easy to carry. The 100 to 500 is still harder to carry than either of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then you're going to basically limit yourself to, when you bring it, you're not bringing the 100 to 500. You're choosing between the two.
Right, but I'm already
doing
lightness. I'm already doing that.
You wouldn't take the 7200 2.8 and the 100 to 500 unless it's a car situation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if I'm shooting out of the car or like it's a 1 to 2 mile hike, yeah, I'd think about it. But if it were an all day thing, no way. I'm already not taking both. So,
okay, fair enough.
It's just something for me to think about. And I just want your quick thoughts.
I do like the idea of lightening up this climbing kit. So that's like the big bonus. Plus, you do save a little bit. Although the new Canon F4 70-200 isn't cheap exactly. I think it's $1,600.
Yes, it's $1,600. But the 7200 would sell for what, $2,400. So
yeah,
you're
saving quite a bit.
That's a chunk of change.
So you're saving money and weight, and you're losing light and bokeh. That is a dilemma.
But I don't, for landscape, I'd have to look at my catalog and actually see how many 7200 2.8 shots I actually have at 2.8. That could be a determining factor. And then also, if it turns out it isn't as sharp as the 7200, then I'm happy staying. But the early reports I'm seeing is that it's like you can't even tell the difference between the shots. So anyway, very interesting. And it's
Yeah, I think
expensive
the
enough. There's no reason for it not to be super duper sharp.
that's fair. I think the portrait photographer part of me is like, don't do it. But the landscape photographer part of me is
Right.
like, yeah, that
Well,
makes a lot
and
of sense.
200 at f4 is still quite a bit of bokeh. I mean, 105
Fair.
at f4 is a decent amount of bokeh, as Toby can attest to in some of his recent shots.
Mhm.
Like, I couldn't believe what he was getting with just the 105.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm loving that 24 to 105 from Canon. That is a really nice duo kit, the 24 to 105 f4, 70 to 200 f4 for like lightweight.
Oh my gosh, it's so small. And
Like
the lenses are
um
basically the same size. So, like, using like a peak design clip, like, it's a
mhm.
no-brainer.
Like I could see that being really useful on summit that's particularly giving you that really wide range of focal lengths
Right.
uh without being real heavy. I guess the main advantage of it is if you were going to do like blue hour shots with the f4, you're going to want a tripod quicker. It's a really specific situation, super specific. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we find ourselves in very often, but it is a thought that like it maybe makes the tripod more necessary in very specific circumstances.
Yeah, I can see that. I
I,
can
I
see that. I
don't
mean,
Here's my
know.
argument though.
I did shoot with a 7200 f4 from 2012 until 2016. So 4 years.
I think
And
I,
I did
I
plenty
think
of.
my argument.
Hmm? What was your
Sorry.
argument, Brandon?
Oh, I was gonna say my argument would be that you could actually probably, by the amount of weight you're saving, that one tripod you got, the new one, I forget the
Yeah,
name,
the peak
but
design. Yeah,
you probably save almost enough weight with the
to
F4 to
bring
bring
that.
that
Yeah,
lift just on.
yeah.
At least your little tiny tripod. I can't think of what it's called right
I
now, but
can't either. It's like that little Benro thing that's been discontinued. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's all. I Some of your work from Yosemite that you did with the 7200 f4, you had it at that point,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I love that stuff. So it's certainly, I mean, you still get the focal lengths, and that's for as a landscape photographer, that's the main thing you're
Right, that's the
paying
main thing,
for.
and image quality. And then again, this is all contingent on. So obviously, I'm not going to do anything until I'm starting to see some comparisons. But the one comparison I could find, the guy talked about it kind of in passing. So I'm not going to trust that. I'm not going to trust a move to that. But any little bit I can shave, it just is adding to my capability. And yeah, I may miss out on some 2.8 shots, but am I going to be getting cooler shots because I can go further faster with a 7200 f4? I mean, it's definitely something for me to think about.
That's fair.
Is it the right balance?
Right,
It's always a balancing act with outdoor stuff, like getting quality and also weight savings.
right. It's always a
So
balance, yeah.
that's always a balance.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started on this here. So, because we got a lot to cover, it's probably gonna be a long episode. But people like long episodes, so.
All right.
So, what we're
Indeed.
going to be doing here is we're going to be going through the major photo equipment brands, and kind of talk about their wins and losses of 2020. And it's kind of a 2020 year in review. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see, because the landscape really changed in some ways. And in some ways, you're going to look at these companies and you're going to be like, whoa, this is all they did.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah,
like,
it's been a hard year for them, just like everybody else, probably.
yeah, yeah.
So
So, yeah, so we're going to get started. We're going to do it in alphabetical order. And that means that the big boy Canon is up first.
it's first. All
Canon's
right.
their biggest win of the year is Toby and me switching to them.
Yeah, I'm sure that they're literally having a party in their offices here in the U.S. about that.
Yeah, for sure.
But the Canon R6, their very controversial camera, along with the R5, between packing incredible specs, kind of completely. I guess to even say this a little bit more straightforward, I think Canon shocked us all the most this year. with their releases. I don't think it seems like something we would have predicted, except that some rumors were starting to leak out at the beginning of the year and the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the stuff was possible. But I remember hearing that the R5, I think early on, somebody said it might shoot 8K, and I was just like, no, it's never gonna do that. Like
Right.
that's just a joke.
Well, it was back in February. The 1DX Mark III had just been actually released and shipped. It had been announced back in January, and then it was released and shipped, and then started hearing rumors about this Canon R5, and they talked about, oh, it's going to have 8K, and everyone was like, that's ridiculous. It's going to have an 8K time-lapse mode or something. And then they just kept doing releases, and the hype just kept building and building until finally the full announcement was in early July. Is that correct? I think. Yes, early July. And then it shipped in at the end of July. And honestly, when you take a step back and really look at it, it delivered, really everything they were saying. I think the overheating thing was crippling for some things. But then again, back in January, those were things no one was even asking for. So, it's kind of interesting to think about that.
I would say that given the take you get with it is kind of crazy, because when you think about it, I was thinking there's going to have to be something major that it gives. And if the specs that they were rumored originally were to happen, I was like, okay, well, there's going to be something like it's going to have a 2-minute record limit or 5-minute record limit in 8K. And considering, like, even though it still overheats and everything, that's actually not the worst thing to give for what you get in a lot of ways, considering what it could have been.
And now,
and the overblownness of the overheating when it first launched was another. I'm not going to call it a failure of the photo media. It was just, it got kind of sensationalized to the point where certain things, like the fact that it does have a full frame 4K mode, it doesn't overheat in 4K crop modes. It felt like it overheated in every mode basically when it first came out, and that just wasn't covered super well. Of course, it is sad that it overheats in 4K HQ. It's sad that it overheats in 8K and high frame rate 4K stuff. But after using the camera this year for video shoots, I actually never had it overheat on me. Did you have it overheat on you, Kemper?
Just one time, and that was after almost 3 hours of shooting in 4K HQ, kind of start and stop. So it wasn't like continuous 3 hours, but we were, shooting, a minute to 2 minute clip, stopping for 30 seconds and then shooting another. And finally, after about 3 hours, but the thing is that they fixed the cooldown time, because when it first was launched, the cooldown time was quite long, even though I actually never successfully got it to overheat when I first had it. I know I could have if I wanted to. That just, I wasn't gonna just overheat it for overheating's sake. But the cooldown time was honestly, we took a short break and then came back, and it just, was back to normal. So I would say maybe it was 10 minutes. Again, this isn't scientific, but it's kind of real world use. So it seems like some of these issues, the overheating issues, got largely ironed out.
Were you using the Ninja V at that moment? Just asking for clarification.
Yes, I was, but I was only using it as a monitor.
Okay. You were recording straight to the camera.
I was recording straight to the camera, yeah. I was kind of a situation where it worked best.
That made more sense.
So, but so the R5, I guess, if you're looking at Canon win and losses, it's Canon's biggest win. It's also the biggest loss, because I do think that the overheating became such a hot story over the late summer that that it pulled some of the wind out of Canon's sails.
Story.
The hot stuff. And then the R6 had overheating issues too, and they haven't been ironed out quite as thoroughly as the R5s.
I do think that I think it's actually really it's profound that Canon's biggest win is kind of also their biggest loss, and that I think Canon's biggest win this year was they released cameras with mind-blowing specs. That's what they went for. And you can almost feel like there was a meeting in Canon and sometime in 2018 or something where they were like, we're going to lose this whole thing if we don't do something big with the EOS R's follow-up cameras. And Canon was like, okay, well, we're going to have to do something wild. And while I do think the 8K, the inclusion of it is somewhat of a marketing scheme that maybe backfired, we still have one of the best images you can record, period, in a camera that costs $3,900.
Right.
And that's really remarkable that you maybe you can't shoot it for 6 hours. That's what red cameras are for. But you can get access to that image for its restricted use, but it's also the first time it's done, the first time it's been done at this price, and the first time it's been done in a weather sealed camera like this. So,
and it's tiny.
And it's tiny.
So the R6, its little brother, came out and has been given DP Reviews, Digital Photography Reviews, Product of the Year award. I think Kemper was somewhat mystified as to why, me as well, as to why that, out of all the stuff that came out this year, got it. But
yeah, I mean, honestly, if it were me picking, spoiler alert, I think the R5 wins. The S3, then probably then you could argue the R6. I mean, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but like I feel like some of the, the other stuff that's come out, the Z6 Mark II, the S5. I mean, they all are so similar. I don't know what makes the R6 so much better than them, but
I could have seen the R6 if it had like no overheating issues at all. But when you add that into the mix, I feel like the R6 is a little bit more like, what about it? Like, I don't know. It's just a little confusing to me.
And that class of camera, once again, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but just the R6's competition is a weirdly compromised group of cameras. The Z6 Mark II is maybe the most well-rounded, but it's still missing the flip screen for videographers. And people looking at that, I think a lot of people are looking at that price point and market segment for video and kind of vlogging cameras. And I think on a sheet of paper, I think the Z6 may make the most sense. And the S5 still has autofocus problems, but has the best quality video. The R6 has overheating problems, amazing 10-bit video, and a flip screen and great autofocus. So it's a really strange market segment right now that's ripe for Sony to release an A7 IV and blow our minds.
Yeah, in January probably. So the other big releases for Canons, almost all of this counts as wins, I really think. And their sneaky big win has to be those 600 and 800 f11 lenses, because when that was rumored to be coming out, everyone was straight laughing at them, being like, who is going to buy an f11 lens, And then they're super cheap. The 800 I think is $900 and the 600 is 800, something like that. And they're super sharp. The autofocus is good, and then the ISO is so good on the R5 that like they really hold up, and wildlife photographers are adopting them and using them and loving them. So I think that's super interesting. Also with the lenses, we have the 100 to 500, which I can say firsthand is an absolutely amazing lens. I was not expecting to love that lens as much as I do, because it's like the difference between 400 to 500 is bigger than I was expecting, and to have it still be a little bit smaller and lighter than the old Canon 100 to 400, like even though it's 7.1, I mean it still applies what I said about the 600 and 800, that the ISO is so good, the stabilization's so good with the R5, just that lens on the R5, absolutely amazing. Then they
I
have
mean, Canon. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say Canon lenses in general are a win. Like they've done so well with every RF lens that they've come out with. Like I don't know if there's one to complain about. Maybe you have something in there, but it seems like they're just spectacular.
No, every RF lens that I've used is spectacular.
The only notation I would have on the 24 to 105 f4 is the close up image quality has quite a bit of ghosting.
That is true. Yeah, the close-up image quality, and that happens sometimes on, especially for whatever reason, 24 to 105s have that issue. But the close-up image quality has some ghosting. That just yeah.
Overall, I love that lens even at f4. I love it to the point where I am continuing to use it instead of moving things around to get some more EF glass, which was the original idea when I was looking at Canon.
Right.
I'm really enjoying the one lens thing, and I really like that lens. But the close-up image quality is something I've definitely, like, it jumps out to you even beyond just pixel peeping. I've still taken some photos I love with it with close focus, though. In some ways, the ghosting almost helped those photos a tiny bit, but you know.
And then I'll just run through the rest of these lenses real quick. 50 mil 1.8 nifty 50, 85 f2, which I've heard is very sharp and nice. The 7200 f4, which we've already talked about, and let's see, and the 600 and 800. So, and then Toby's probably going to want to talk about their two cinema cameras.
Oh yes, Toby's the C70. The C300 Mark III are at least was the C500 this year?
I don't think so.
I think it was last year, C500 Mark II. But the C70 is a camera I'm very interested in myself. It basically has the 4K features from the R5, but with no overheating. So 4K up to 120 frames per second. And it does something really interesting of taking what is great about video bodies with tons of ports, really bulky, heavy, so it's easier to get smooth handheld shots, built-in ND filters, all this good stuff. And it mixes that with kind of what we love about hybrid stills bodies, using those for video with just that form factor. It's a camera I really hope to get my hands on at some point to try out. The C300 Mark III is it's a $10,000 monster that shoots RAW, basically RAW in every mode the C70 doesn't shoot RAW in. So the C70 does not shoot RAW. That's probably the biggest news on it, since RAW is starting to become something a lot of cameras offer now. If you want RAW, you can probably find a camera at any price point that will provide that. So it is interesting to see a camera like that and not featuring that. I don't know if I'd say that's a loss because I don't think they're marketing it that direction. It's more of a workhorse kind of get the job done kind of camera, not necessarily the greatest image pusher in the world.
It still has really good dynamic range, though, doesn't it?
It does. It has great dynamic range. And it has 10-bit color in all modes. It just doesn't have that 12-bit, which usually means it's RAW. So that kind of next level that you're seeing from other brands. But it also means you're not dealing with RAW workflows, which is honestly really good. It's a really good get your feet wet in the professional video world camera. Cool. C300 Mark III is like, we're going to Patagonia and I want to get crazy shots of it, but you know.
Although in reality, if you went to Patagonia, you'd probably want to go as small and light as you possibly could.
I'd probably go with the R5. I'd take a C300 Mark III and an R5. I mean, you gotta cover all your bases, right?
There you go.
Just the minimum.
Just the bare necessities.
Just the minimal.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's. Do you guys have any final thoughts on?
Well, I think
Canon?
just to wrap up, Canon 2020 really was just a giant win for them, just overall. Like we're doing
And a
wins and
full
losses.
send to mirrorless.
Yeah, they full sended the mirrorless. They've got pro bodies, like when you think about when Sony was this ready for a pro to move into that Sony system, like it took a lot longer than it's taken Canon. So like I'm really excited to kind of see where Canon's going, and we're gonna kind of talk about that in the next couple weeks, kind of our predictions for 2021. But looking back at 2020, huge win for them. Even though they had the overheat gate, I think they've kind of overcome it and are and just giant win.
Well,
So,
and people are starting to. We see this happen every time the camera industry or the marketing of camera, I don't know what you call it, the reviewers, I guess, overreact to something. You can see this kind of it starts getting pulled back a few months later. So people start kind of changing the narrative a little bit. And that, in addition to Canon releasing those firmware updates, YouTube in particular started to get populated with quite a few videos that are kind of gushing over the camera. I think part of that is it was always kind of false, and we'll talk about the S3 more later from the S3's perspective, but I think it was always kind of false to compare them so much, because the R5 isn't really a video first camera and the S3 is.
right.
The R5 at its heart is still a stills camera, a hybrid camera.
Right.
I think that there's, to some degree, the fact that it shoots better image quality at all is maybe not a strike against Sony, but I do think that if you pull the overheating out of the R5, whether that's miraculously Canon makes it disappear, or you are the type of videographer that doesn't need to shoot more than a few minutes at a time, all of a sudden the S3 makes almost no sense at all, because the R5 does everything S3 does
And more.
and more. So I think that, except for the 1080 240 frames per second, but
right.
That's not to necessarily say no one should go out and buy the S3. There's a spot for the S3. I just think that because they came out side by side, this narrative began that, oh, the S3 doesn't overheat, it's just so superior. And it's like, well, it is if you're a professional videographer that needs unlimited recording, both not limited by a 30-minute record limit or overheating. So
right.
I think that that's starting to pull back to where people are really being like, oh, yeah, wait a second, the R5 actually is really cool.
Yep. I think I agree. It does.
Can I add a slight nuance to that?
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe the distinction is like the S3 is a better, like slightly more high quality workhorse camera. So if you're doing these, like you kind of already mentioned, over 30 minutes, just a lot of filming in a day, you're shooting high quality 4K for like long periods of time, I think the S3 makes more sense in a lot of ways than the R5. But the R5 kind of destroys the S3 if you're doing kind of cinematic B-roll or like that kind of style of just very high quality short clips. Like if you did commercials, even, like it makes sense to shoot on the R5. Like if you're trying to make like a car commercial or a drink commercial or something, like the R5 makes a lot more sense. But the S3, if you're doing something long term, or like a longer project, it kind of makes more sense.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah,
and
sure.
if you get that overheating and record limit out of the R5, which I think is possible that will happen, then it really is quite a force to be reckoned with against the S3. So
especially looking at
then,
especially looking at a potential R5 Mark II where they can work on the body a little bit. Actually putting I did see something that if you put a bronze plate in the R5, like in the right place, somebody did this. I'll see if I can locate the video for the description. I'll give it my best shot. But somebody actually put a bronze plate inside the R5 that sort of helps it dissipate heat and was able to shoot 8K for twice as long. So there's definitely things that could be done. in either a subsequent R5 model or maybe a video specialist model. We'll talk about that more in the in the predictions for 2021 video, though.
Yep. Well, I think it's time to move on to Fuji. People are probably getting tired of hearing us talk about how great Canon is.
Oh dear. Well,
yeah. So
we are Canon sheep, I guess, but we got to talk about Fuji.
This was a little bit of a surprise to me on how quiet Fuji has been this year. I guess I just wasn't really thinking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, surely Fuji's released a bunch of stuff, but really, their headline release was the X-T4, which came out in the late spring, early summer.
Yeah, I know, Toby, you were looking into the X-T4 for a little bit. Do you want to throw some knowledge at us?
So the X-T4 was kind of the opposite of the R5 in a funny way, where there was these specs that were rumored on it that it was going to shoot 4K 120 and it was going to shoot 6K and it was going to be really awesome with a newly designed body. And all it really was in the end was a X-T3 that has an IBIS in it, or in-body image stabilization. And there are other differences. Well, the X-T3 shot 4K 60 and 10-bit. So all that stuff was
all that
X-T3.
Stuff is already in the X-T3.
I didn't realize that.
So what ended up kind of happening with that camera is it actually got announced, and I ended up picking the A6600 over the X-T4 for my kind of summer shooting as the camera I wanted to go with, for various reasons. But a lot of it just comes down to, I think the X-T4 is overpriced for being an APS-C camera right now.
Yeah, it's overpriced, and it kind of under-delivered where I think people were expecting a bigger leap, especially after the X-T3 being such a breakout camera for Fuji. I feel like people started taking Fuji a lot more seriously, and they were like, oh, the X-T4 is just going to build on that, and it really kind of didn't. It has a new battery that I've heard does very little. It's only a little bit better, is what I've heard. Again, this is one of the cameras, I don't think any of us have any real hands-on experience with, but
no,
it does seem like this was kind of a lost year for Fuji. I felt like going into 2020, Fuji had a lot of momentum going for it. It was becoming kind of the boutique photo brand, so to speak. It was just like, they were fun to use, good image quality for what you were using, and I feel like they've kind of lost some momentum over the year. There is this XS10 that was also released that kind of an insignificant deal.
I mean, I'm sure it's nice. It shoots... I've actually not really studied the spec sheet before, so we're studying this together for the first time.
Yeah.
It has 26 megapixels, so the same as the
X-T4.
The X-T4, probably the same sensor. It's got a fully articulating touchscreen. That was another big adjustment they made. I was kind of thinking, I feel like they did something else to the X-T4. They added that fully articulating touchscreen, which was actually controversial in the Fuji community, if I remember correctly. And
oh yeah, that is true. Like they that was controversial. Like it's great for, videographers and stuff, but I think a lot of pure photographers prefer the old style of just come off the back.
It does shoot, so the video specs on it, just to kind of get through these, it has a 30-minute record limit, but it does shoot 4K. It does shoot 240 frames per second in full HD. It has F-Log, 8-bit 420, and 10-bit. So it's a pretty stacked video camera. It appears. Overall, Fuji's autofocus is, I would say, somewhat controversial for video.
Right.
I think it stills is good, but
yeah,
the video
stills is
is a
good,
little
but video
controversial.
is nah. It seems like.
But
So,
that's partially based off the lenses. They have a lot of old lenses that are just not as, their autofocus motors and stuff are not as great.
Yeah.
and did they release that 50 1.4 this year?
No, it was a 50 1.0.
Oh,
Yeah.
did they get that out?
I don't think it. I think they announced it, but I don't think it's shipping yet. Like, forgive us if we're wrong on that, but I don't think it's shipping yet. So.
Yeah,
All right.
Fuji was the kind of hardest to. It's the one I was tracking the least this year for the most part.
Yep. Me
So
too.
it is Nikon time.
Oh, it's Nikon time.
Oh boy.
And Nikon's kind of your poster child for true wins and losses this year. It's just everyone's been kind of piling on Nikon. I feel like it's becoming unfair. Like all of their losses are in the news, and there's a lot of gloating from fans of other camera brands. I think for a long time Nikon was seen as kind of one of the big dogs, and to kind of see him struggling a little bit seems to be making people happy for some reason. It doesn't make me happy, but because Nikon is a great. I've used Nikons, and they're really really great cameras, and their mirrorless system is great.
I honestly think the. Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just
go
gonna say, I
ahead.
think the Z6 and Z7 originals were a lot super underrated for what they were. I thought they were I've used only them a couple times with you and with David and a couple other friends that have them, but I thought they were great.
Yeah, no, they are great cameras, and so their big releases of the year was they didn't release anything until late summer. Late summer with the Z5, which the Z5 is in some ways it's their biggest win of the year because it's almost a Z6, for it's like $1,400, I think, something like that, $1,300 It's not very expensive, and it has dual memory card slots, the same sensor. The video capabilities are not as good, but it still shoots 4K and it still has good autofocus. I mean, I think it's cropped 4K, but it still is there. So it's like they quietly released this camera that's actually very capable for a lot of people. If you're just getting into mirrorless, full frame mirrorless, the Z5 is going to be very tempting. And I think over time that the Z5 release is going to pay dividends because it's a lot less crippled than some of the other entry level.
It's really just the RP at this point,
right? And the RP was not a great release for Canon. Like it had that old sensor in it that's just not very good dynamic range, and the video was terrible.
It literally had the 60 Mark II's sensor, so it had that massive drama that it was having to immediately deal with. And the fact that at launch Canon didn't put 24p in the RP, so yeah, the Z5 was a much more well-rounded camera, and it's got the dual card slots, which is a big nod. I'm looking at it now, and it has a thumbstick, which is another really surprising thing.
Yeah. No, if I were just getting into the industry like right now, and I kind of if I'm thinking back to like me like 6 years ago, right, where I'm really trying to take things to the next level, go full frame, like the Z5 is probably what I'm looking at because it's not that expensive and you get a lot for what you're getting. In a lot of ways, it's just a little. It's missing the full frame 4K of the A7 III, but it's toe to toe with the A7 III, and it's quite a bit cheaper. And then lens wise.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like the Z5 and the 24-70 f2.8. Like, I know that's a little bit pricey, but that would be a perfect full frame start like just a beautiful combination.
It would be. And, you know, you're getting it's expensive, but you're getting a lot for that. So you're getting, I think, value-wise, the Z5 is the best bang for your buck. Probably camera out there right now.
Does it have IBIS?
I am not sure on that. I think so.
I felt like it did.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So kind of their lenses, they added some critical lenses to be for their pro. They have been much slower than Canon at adding the lenses, which I think has killed, because when the both companies announced their full frame mirrorless clear back in 2018, like they were neck and neck, you know. I feel like Canon has gotten ahead of Nikon, and a big reason for that is their lenses. Nikon's taken a long time to get some of the, like, Nikon 7200 2.8 started shipping in October, and Canon's was shipping a year ago or more. So actually it was right at a year ago. So they have like almost a full year of that being out. And then the 15 to 35 for Canon was shipping well over a year ago. And the 14 to 24 is only just now getting in people's hands. So like, you know, but so Nikon released the 1424 2.8, 7200 2.8, 51.2, and the 21.8, which I actually got to use the 21.8 on Nikon Z7. And it's a great, great, great lens. Loved it. So, and then the kind of the loss for Canon is the Z6 Mark II and Z7 Mark II, because it's not because they're bad cameras, and it's not because they don't have good capabilities. I think it's because they didn't really do enough. They're kind of patch cameras. They kind of solved some of the issues with the original Z6 and Z7, which again, like in a vacuum, they're fantastic cameras. It's just like the Z7 Mark II does not really go toe to toe with the R5, and it's cheaper, so there's that for it. But just capability wise, it was a missed opportunity for Nikon, and it makes me feel like it's going to be several years before we're actually seeing features that are in the R5 and some of the new Sony cameras, which is kind of disappointing.
Well, for Nikon right now, they're going to have people still thinking about buying the original Z6 and Z7. Like, I mean, I think we would all maybe go for the Mark II, but how many people out there do you think are really going to be like, oh yeah, the Mark II is worth so much more than the original Z7?
Right,
so,
right.
Or at least as well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, it's just funny. I was watching this YouTube video earlier today that was talking about a feature in the Z6 and Z7 too, and I'm just like, oh wow. So Nikon, sometimes they bury these really cool features and they don't talk about them, but then you have to find it. But it has this thing where you can save a focus point, and what I mean by that is that like you actually save a focus distance, so you can save infinity in the camera, and just pull up infinity like super easy. It's just like, so like star focusing and some of that stuff is really cool. So you can't like mess up your focal point. Like we were talking about, I think we talked about in the it happened when we were at the Blue Lakes earlier this year with Brandon taking the star photos.
Yeah.
It went to sleep and he lost his focus point. And with these new cameras, you can just save exactly where you want to focus. You could saved it like from the night before, you know, because infinity is infinity.
Not to bash Sony too much, but it was just something I'd never thought about, because normally we're just out for a very long time doing shots, and I was like, oh yeah, if it falls asleep, that's not going to matter. And camera fell asleep, went back. I had nailed tag focus prior to this, but then the galaxy is right where I want it, and my camera wakes back up and it's just the whole screen's blurred, and I'm like, great. Yeah. So I had to try to find it, and it's not a fun experience when, you know, both the clocks running down on the galaxy being where you want it to be, and then the focus it was okay. I'm not disappointed with the shot too much, but it's just not what it was going to be. So
yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess like they didn't lose hard this year, other than that it seems like the news machine was kind of hard on them and some of the business problems they're having. But I think that what they actually got out was good. They needed to get it out. I would like to see them in 2021 maybe push forward a little bit and, just kind of tease, what we're going to be talking about. I think that there's potential for them too. And if
Be
you've
a
listened to one
Z8
of our other
or
podcasts, you know
Z9.
what I'm talking about. Yeah, the Z9. So,
Oh yeah.
so
They also released a 51.2 this year to compete directly with Canon.
right after the what should not have okay, this is one of those things where there's no reason to bash something for existing. Like the 56 0.95 was not something that existed before, and people were mad at it for existing. It didn't have autofocus, and it's like, well, it's this thing. Like it's expensive, probably too expensive, but it is super sharp. But it's just kind of irritating to just be like, oh yeah, let's be mad at this thing for Nikon for releasing
Just
this thing that
existing.
apparently it's really cool, but
and I think that some people don't have this is going to be a critique of a certain thing I think people do that I might get bashed for, but I think sometimes people see something that's $9,000 and they think to themselves, that's ridiculous and dumb. Who would ever spend money on that? I certainly wouldn't. And I just think that's you don't know what projects they're working on. If you're working on a huge, thousands and thousands of dollars project, you may want that specific lens for that specific thing.
yeah.
Or if you're working on a project that you just want to look different, you want it to be special, and you want to invest that money in it, that's your prerogative. It's
Right.
not out of the
Exactly.
question for people to own cameras that are 4 times the price of that lens or more for certain
and
projects.
Think about it, like you're a fine art photographer and you own one camera and one lens. Like that is your look. You shoot only with that lens, and maybe you own like a Z6 Mark II or something. We all, I think, well, I know Kemper has getting pretty close to that amount of money in gear. It's just he has it spread out over a different style, and I think I do. Yeah, I have probably about that much. So if we did something in a different life, like we might be doing that too.
Right.
It's just people do different things.
Just didn't deserve the hate. Sometimes the hate for hate's sake is kind of gets frustrating. So
Yeah.
Oh right. So Panasonic. And Panasonic spent most of they're investing in their full frame. That is, I think people are feeling like it's going just okay.
Well, actually, I have an interesting thing to say about that. I started the year with Panasonic, and ended up leaving in April. And S1s are going for more now than they were then.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a few $100 more than they used to be going for. So I don't know what that means exactly, but I guess it means that demand is up from what it was this spring anyway.
Yeah. Well, of course, this spring, things were happening in April.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I mean, I guess
sure.
it is a good point though that that it seems like it's picking up momentum, and their big camera release of the year. There really was just one. There's this G100, which is kind of a box GH5, which is cool, but maybe not their headline release. But the S5, and the S5, like everybody got super high on it for a hot minute because they were looking at the stats and then what they was gonna sell for, what it was rumored to sell for. Because I think everybody thought that it was kind of a Z5 equivalent, and really what it is it's almost an S1 Mark II ish. Come on, you know more of the stats about it, Tobe, but
So what it really is and this is weird because everyone called the S1 this. It's very similar to the S1. It's the GH5's replacement. This is the GH5 or GH6 or whatever. I guess we'll see if they release a GH6, but I kind of doubt it at this point. I think it's much more likely that they'll release stills focused Micro Four Thirds bodies at this point, just because of the way things are going. But we'll see. And it's very similar on paper to the S1. I really liked the S1, and this camera targeted a few of the things I didn't like about it. They shrunk the body down. It was a little oversized, I think. I kind of liked that in a way, but it was a very heavy camera that factored into some of my decision making. They put a fully articulating touchscreen in there, which is really nice. It was actually one of my big issues with the S1, one of the motivations to switch. From an image quality perspective, though, they didn't do very much, except that they added RAW out for 6K RAW out to a Ninja 5. So, it's this camera that almost feels like if we're calling the Z6 II and the Z7 II kind of patch cameras, this camera is an aggressive patch for the S1. It fixes a lot of problems with that camera, but it doesn't fix the big one,
which is autofocus.
And that's autofocus.
Yep.
It improved it, but oftentimes I really liked I can't think who said it at this point, but they basically said better autofocus isn't necessarily good autofocus, and I think that's what we're dealing with here.
Panasonic, I think that until they switch to phase detect for video, I mean, unless they're on the cusp of a huge technological breakthrough with contrast detect autofocus, until they switch to phase, like, they're going to just be behind, and no one's going to really invest in them until they do, even though the image quality is great, their features are great, their design is great.
And the other problem is just that you're going into an ecosystem that doesn't have that much glass. Like, yes, they came out with a little bit this year, but they just don't have that much glass out there. So
yeah, they do. I guess to their credit, they do have 24 to 70 2.8, 70 to 200 2.8. They don't have very many primes. They're working on it. They have an 85 1.8, a 24 1.8's on the way.
They have the very interesting 20 to 60 3.5 to 5.6, which was released along with the S5, and having a kit lens that's that wide, that's really nice. I feel like 20 to 60 is a great focal range. I think I understand why camera companies don't release it, because I may not own a 16 to 35 and a 24-70, so to speak. If it was a 20 to 60.
But to Brandon's point, I do agree that their lens lineup is the weakest of the mirrorless full frame mounts at this point.
It is. Yeah, just
not necessarily on image quality. Their lenses are stellar. They're fine, but they're not special. So when you mix that, they're not special. The 24 to 105 is sharp and nice. I don't think it's as nice as the Canon 24 to 105 I'm using.
No.
The 70 to 200 f4 kind of seems like that one's just not that sharp. In our experience with that lens and other anecdotal evidence, we don't necessarily want to throw that under the bus 100%. But I just think that the Panasonic line, if they can pull their act together in the next 2 years, then they could be a big deal, because all they need to do is release an S5 that has amazing autofocus, and I would be very serious about moving over to that camera.
Yep. I think
Yeah.
Panasonic, I'm gonna go ahead. We can kind of save more for the prediction show, but I think they're a dark horse. I think all of the sudden, I think one time we're gonna be doing a podcast and we're gonna be looking at it and we're like, wait, Panasonic is really good now. Like, look at what they have and look at what they can do. Like, I feel like, I don't think that they're just going to fail like some, YouTubers and various other people are saying that they think they're going to straight fail. I think that they're just grinding away. And I think all of the sudden, like a company like Nikon is actually going to, maybe be in trouble. And I think even, we're looking at them as competition for their spot.
Yeah, well, and keep in mind that they also are part of the L Mount Alliance, so we just don't know what that has to offer yet.
Right.
That's
Sigma
something
hasn't
to
done
keep
a
in
ton
mind.
with that this year.
It was rumored a little over a year ago. I think we talked about it on one of our old podcasts that Panasonic Lumix and Leica were actually going to merge branding, and that they would actually start calling the Panasonic cameras Leica cameras. They would remove the Panasonic moniker and start calling them Leica. I still think that would be a huge business move for them. I think if suddenly you call it the Leica S5, it's like the Lumix, the Leica Lumix line, I think that would, branding wise, all of a sudden people would take them more seriously. And all it is a name change. But I think it would be an interesting perception change. So, all right. So I guess, just to wrap up Panasonic, I think it wasn't a huge win. It wasn't a huge loss. I guess it was a big win because they managed to stay in the game in 2020, which a lot of companies and stuff haven't. So that's great. But
And
okay,
the big
so
loss is just that they're autofocus.
yeah, big loss is
Yeah,
autofocus.
every year that goes by that they don't really fix that is a loss for them, I think, because it's a year that everyone is. A year ago, Kemper talked about this, and I think this is still true. We're in this magic area of all these brand new mounts, with Sony E mount being the oldest, which is, we're going to be talking about Sony in a second here. But we're talking about the oldest mount in the professional world right now is 7. I guess E mount's a little older than that, but the full frame lenses, the full frame cameras started in 2013.
Right.
So, you go back beyond 2013 and none of these camera lines are even in existence. So, right now you have this opportunity. Everyone's kind of starting that long shift over to these new mounts. And there's this big opportunity for Panasonic, for Fuji, and Sony's done by far the best job at this point of asserting themselves as a new player in this market. And for Panasonic, I think that it's a loss that they let another year slip by without fixing this, without switching over to phase detect. And who knows why they continue to do it. I'm sure if you were able to talk to someone, they would give you a line of reasons why they're needing to stick to, or they think it's best to stick to contrast. But if they fix it, they have a really good shot at making a big splash in the industry.
This was the storyline clear back with the GH5, which was like, I don't know how many years old, but several years now. Like
2016, 17.
2016, 17. That's when the Panasonic's autofocus, video autofocus isn't very good. Started back then, is still going on now, years later. And it's time to fix it. So, yeah. So real quick, we're going to run through a couple of, I think we'll just talk about some wins real quick in the support brands. Some, it's like, these are like either lens brands or like smaller camera brands that kind of had wins. The GoPro Hero 9, big win. We all three have them. We love them.
Indeed.
The Sigma 8514, Sigma managed to outdo the G Master for a lot cheaper,
Mhm.
and it's small and light. It's
Hurtful.
really hurtful, but
Well, and Sigma's even released a number of other big lenses. I don't remember if the 24-70 was this year or last
no, it's
year.
last year.
But that's made a splash this year. They've released, I think they just released a 35 and a 65 mil. I think they released a macro this year. And keep in mind, I guess,
Oh yeah, the 105.
Yeah,
reflecting back towards Panasonic, technically all these lenses are native to the Panasonic lenses, so that helps their lens lineup. But if you're talking just about Panasonic,
right.
they do have the weakest
That's
lens
true.
lineup.
Those Siggy lenses work on Panasonic full frame, so yeah, that's
Which
a
means
good
there
point.
is a 14 to 24 2.8, so you could compose a holy trinity. So there's a lot of infrastructure there that Sigma's building up for them, but Sigma's also building that up for Sony as
yeah.
well.
Well, and then I
Um,
think the support brand, the big support brand winner of the year has to be Tamron. The
mhm.
Oh yeah.
70 to 180,
I
the
always forget I have that
28
lens.
to 70, 2.8 to 5.6.
Mhm.
Like those are like just those two, and there may be more, but just those two on their own, like that 70 to 180, so small, so light, as sharp or sharper than it completely beats out the G Master, the many times more expensive G Master for this tiny
Yeah, more
little
than double.
lens. Yeah, it's a great lens.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
I bought I don't know for who knows, but I sold my 24 or not 24 to 70 to 200 G Master to get the 70 to 180 Tamron. So
have you missed it
and
at all?
very happy with.
Yeah, I'm very happy.
No, not really.
And then there's that 28 to 200, um, which is 2.8. It's 2.8 to 5.6, I think. But having a mega zoom like that, have 2.8 on it for any use. I mean, like, it's really good innovation. And honestly, like, I know that that Sony owns part of Tamron somehow, something about that. But in truth, Tamron is stealing Sony business at this point. And Sony's going to have to. We can talk. Well, you know what? It's Sony's last one. We can go ahead and transition into Sony. And I'll say,
Well, just rest in peace, Olympus, before we
oh
move on.
yes, yeah, that was
Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed.
the true loser of the year was Olympus, and that it's not going to be around anymore. So
Or maybe
Anyway.
it'll shock us. The zombie camera company. They did
I'm
they
back
did
in the
release a
day.
150 to 400 after they were sold. So
right for
that
wasn't it $7,000 or something like that, or there was some
wouldn't be shocked.
crazy Olympus thing that cost a whole lot of money. Anyway.
Yeah.
So now we're to Sony, and I'll go ahead and say what I was going to say, in that Sony has a lot of wins this year. They released the A7S III, which was a huge win. The FX6 seems like a big win. The 12 to 24 2.8 is a big win. The 21.8 was a big win early in the year. But still, their lens game is behind. They're behind. The 12 to 24 is great. It's very heavy and very expensive, prohibitively expensive. It's more of a, it's kind of like the Canon 28 to 75 f2 in
28
that,
to 70.
yeah, 28 to 70 f2 in that it's kind of nice to know that it's out there, but a lot of people it's just kind of pointless. And it's also big and heavy, so
The only thing about that is there is no 12 millimeter f2.8 lens out there that even as a prime that I know of. So
right. There's primes. There are primes. You can even
A
put them on
Laowa, I think.
Laowa, yeah, and it's zero distortion, very sharp, but not autofocus, obviously.
yeah,
But the S3 is probably the big Sony story. That camera was supposed to come out in how long ago now?
Well, it's 5 years since the A7S II came out in 2015, so it's
Yeah.
been 5 years, which is
Yeah.
a long time. It didn't disappoint, but I think that Sony released it not a moment too soon.
Yeah.
In that I think there's going to be cameras next year that I think they'll be more expensive than the S3. And this, once again, is kind of alluding to what might happen next year, but I think there'll be cameras next year that do everything the S3 does, including it doesn't overheat and has a higher resolution sensor, which is going to be hard for the S3 to deal with over just in a competitive market. But the beauty of the S3 just has to be the footage off of it looks amazing, even if it is a little softer than even the A7 III. It just, the dynamic range looks on point. The slow motion looks amazing. That part of the camera really seems to be delivering.
Right, and
You get those
it
Venice
shoots
colors.
unlimited 4K 120, and unlimited in the fact that it doesn't overheat, at least very often. It has.
I think they did like 2 hours or something before it overheats.
Yeah, something crazy like that. And then there's the 1080 240, which is really cool. Although it's almost slow enough as to be gimmicky to actually use in the real world. I find 120 to be a little too slow sometimes.
I think that it all comes down to how quick what it is that you're shooting is moving, I guess.
That's
and
a
it's
really,
just not
really
very
good point. Really, really good
not
point.
very often you run into something that fast. But anyway, you were saying, Brandon?
Daniel Schiffer has used it pretty well for like doing kind of these like studio-esque shots of drinks, like pouring a drink. It's hard to like, that almost looks bad when you do it in slow-mo, so I like 120 anyways.
Yeah.
So being able to do that in 240 kind of has a good like effect to it. Good perspective.
And then we talked about the FX6 quite a bit last week, but it's kind of a cinema version of the S3, in that it's kind of in a cinema body and has a few extra features. It has a better color science, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it has better color science, but maybe slightly worse auto white balance, which is
interesting.
problematic.
And worse autofocus too.
Yeah, slightly worse autofocus, but it does have built-in ND filters. That's nice.
That's nice.
And it also looks incredible. The footage off of it looks great. The FX6 it's pretty simple in my mind. You buy the S3 if you are a one-man team. If you're a production team, even if you only have one camera operator, you should probably just buy the S3.
Yeah. I'll go out on a limb a little bit and say that I think the A7C is a loss. Not so much that it's not a capable camera, and that you couldn't buy it and do amazing things with it in 2020 and 2021. You could. It just feels like a missed opportunity to me. They just basically just reboxed the A7 III, which is a legendary camera at this point. The A7 III is. And it
Here's
felt
a quick question.
Yeah.
Would it still be a lost opportunity if they had included just 4K 60? If that was another feature.
It would be a lot less because there'd be something new that you're getting. There's not really anything new that you're getting other than that it's smaller and lighter than the A7 III. Like it has I guess that's not completely true. It has the real-time tracking autofocus, so the autofocus is better. But I also think that kind of the user of the A7 III and the A7C, they may not actually notice that difference as much. That it has that higher level. So like I feel like you look at the A7C compared to the Z5, which it's more expensive than the Z5, by $200 to $300 more expensive. And
no, it's more than that. It's isn't it 1,800?
Oh yeah, so maybe even more than that. But like you look at it compared to the Z5, and it's not that great. I mean, it really just is a rebranded A7 III that's smaller.
It's better for video probably. Full frame 4K is really nice. and the addition of the flip screen's really nice as well.
That's true. Good
for
point.
this kind of
good point. If your video, then it's better than the Z5. Yeah, that's a
but
good point.
if you're stills, I can't think of anything besides Sony's autofocus is probably better, or it is better, I think, than Nikon's right now, at
Yeah.
least for sports. They're all basically the same for stills and single shot mode. They're all great at this point. So yeah, it's I think the A7C, it was another one of those cameras I was kind of looking at when it was kind of rumored to be announced. To kind of expand on what Brandon said, if it had 4K 60, I probably would have purchased it. Yes. But
Yeah.
I think that the A7C may have been somebody in Sony saying, we can't let all of 2020 go without releasing some new stills camera.
Yeah.
And because here's the thing, like the S3 and the A7C, that's it for A7 cameras, and that's it for most of Sony's cameras in general. And while the R4 being released at the end of the year last year is holding its own with its megapixel bump, I do think that from a stills perspective, Sony didn't do very much this year. And I think that's a loss because I think there was a gap to blow the S5, Z6 Mark II, and the R6 out of the water. And it's not going to be as impressive if they do it in a year. Whereas if they had done it now or do it really soon. And it's putting a lot of pressure on the A7 IV to be amazing. And if it's disappointing, like it overheats or it doesn't shoot 4K 60, which I know one of the only rumored spec sheets is that it'll shoot 6K but not 4K 60. We'll see where that pans out. And it just needs to be really impressive. It can't just nestle into the pack very well, since all those other camera companies have released their new, I guess you'd call it entry-level full-frame or mid-level full-frame cameras.
Yeah, that mid-level. And like you said,
For
I think
enthusiasts.
they're rumored to be coming out of the gate again, kind of teasing to our next show where we're going to talk about like what are we looking forward to in 2021 or predictions. But if things don't come out, if they don't come out of the gate like a bang in January, February, which is kind of what everybody's thinking, is it's going to be that soon. If that doesn't happen, then I think it's gonna it's gonna grind on Sony a little bit with that they don't. And honestly, the R4, having used both the R4 and the R5, the R5 is such a better camera than the R4. The R4 is capable. It has, it's not a bad camera. But I would not trade the 20 some odd megapixel bump on the R4 for what I get with the R5.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about upgrading to the R5 instead of staying in Sony. I'm, still going to give it a little bit of time, but,
yeah,
it's not good for Sony.
Yeah, well, and Canon is, and that's the thing, is that there's significant rumors about Canon too, what they're coming out with, and it's gonna be really interesting. It does seem like if we can kind of zoom out now, because we kind of talked about all the brands, it seems like we went like if you had a theme for 2019 with the camera brands, is that it became a true 3-horse race with Canon, Nikon, and Sony. The theme of 2020 is it kind of went back to a 2-horse race between Canon and Sony, and Nikon's going to have to kind of catch up. And it's kind of it's going to be what's Sony going to do, what's Canon going to do, what's Sony going to do, what's Canon going to do, is what I'm kind of seeing as the future based on what happened with 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess another thing I'd like to point out is we're now fully mirrorless. Every company is pushing their mirrorless camera. pretty much all of them are professional. There's better ones and less better ones, but all of the mirrorless cameras out there right now are pretty usable to use professionally.
That's actually a really good point. We did not talk about a single camera with a mirror in it.
We did talk about one. The
1DX Mark III.
Oh yeah, we did mention it. Oh my goodness, that came out this year. That's not even
That
on the
did.
I
list.
forgot about that.
Oh my
Yeah, we
gosh, that's
forgot about
Canon's flagship body, and we didn't talk about it in their big releases.
I think we did.
Because it's
We
a
did
loss.
mention it. We mentioned it. I think we mentioned it, but yeah. Anyway, if we want to bring the circle all the way back around to Canon's, quite possibly Canon's last professional EF body, it was pretty cool. Shoots 5.5K RAW, dual pixel autofocus.
Oh my gosh, people were so hyped for that back in January.
You almost went for it.
I almost
remember?
went for it. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Forgot about that.
That feels so long ago.
It does feel so long
Oh my
ago.
gosh, that we were talking about the 1DX3. I seriously, I did not even think about that was this year, but it was.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's been a good year for cameras, I would say, on the whole, though.
I'm glad it's been a good year for something.
It's been, well, I think here's an interesting thing. I think it's been a good year for Canon. Despite the
Take
drama.
Canon out of the equation. Has it been such a great year?
It was a great year for Canon and the A7S III.
And I don't know. I don't want to give too much hate to the 12 to 24. I think that was pretty cool.
It is really
that's
cool. It is. I mean, right. I mean, it would be being a little hypocritical to give hate to it when we talked about the 0.95 56095, but it's not going to change the landscape in so much that a lot of people are going to buy it and use it. It's just really cool tech.
And it's I think, not to get into too much prediction stuff, but a glimmer into maybe Sony kind of fixing up some of their lenses. So
right. And Sony is going, that is something that Sony, like, there's all this cool stuff that they, it would be cool if they did, but if they don't shape up their lens game, like there recently was a video, I think DP Review did it, that compared all the 7200s of all the brands. And Sony's lost, and it lost hard in that video.
Yeah.
And it, having used that lens and you use that lens, like it is like, and there's a lot of Sony lenses that are, I like the 85 G Master. The 135 is a great lens. But their zooms are not great. And, I guess the 200
I need to keep in mind.
Go ahead.
I just need to keep in mind that I use only one actual Sony lens, because I have the two Zeiss, then I have the Sony 85 1.4, and then I have the Tamron. So
oh wow, that's true.
I keep thinking I have mainly Sony lenses, but I don't.
You don't. You have one, and you have a good one.
Yeah.
But I think that Sony, this is a down year. This was just one of Sony's down years. I think that we'll have to, as an extra teaser for the next episode, we're going to have to talk about the fact that I'm pretty sure the R5 is due next year. The Sony R5.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And the just regular 4.
And the A7 IV. And I think everyone needs to be a little just, open-minded to what Sony may bring to the table with those two cameras, because they also have the benefit of being last to that game, kind of. I mean, Sony was kind of first to the new breed of professional stills bodies, but those two cameras could make or break Sony in many ways, because they know what the other camera companies have done. The other camera companies tend to upgrade a little bit slower.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think we're going to see an R5 II in till 2022 at the absolute earliest.
Right. I mean,
true.
We are maybe going to see, we're shifting into our prediction show, but there is an R5S rumored hard for Q1 2021, which is going to be a high megapixel R5.
I think next year's going to be maybe
next year's
wild.
could be
so
wild. But
a
All
lot
right,
of
you have to keep
anxiety
it for-
for a
We
lot
gotta
of
keep it.
anxiety for me to deal with.
Yeah.
Do I have the right camera sitting over here with a EOS R? You know.
I think you're in the right system overall. I think so.
Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, thanks so much for watching this episode. You can definitely subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app. Also, if you want to leave us a review on iTunes, that would also be awesome. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube. The best place probably to ask us a question or let Kemper know what you think about him getting a 70-200 f4 would be the YouTube comments.
Yeah,
it's
for
just
sure.
the place we check the most.
I mean,
But
you can also reach out to me on Instagram at SummitBid. And I'd love for you to follow SummitBid on Instagram.
oh yeah, you
And then,
betcha.
we're maybe gonna be on TikTok soon. Is that a rumor?
Oh boy.
We are on TikTok.
for-
We're on TikTok.
For the prediction.
Save
We're-
it for
we're-
the prediction.
Will we
Alright.
be successful at TikTok? I don't know. I don't know. This is a different kind
Okay.
of content for me.
Yeah.
Now save that for the predictions.
Yeah. All right.
right.
Well, you guys have a great week. Bye.